The ballroom of Thornbury Hall glittered with the light of 1,000 candles, but Alara felt none of its warmth. She stood near the garden doors, her spine pressed against the cool glass as if she could vanish into the night beyond. The silk of her gown, borrowed, too tight across the shoulders, the color of faded lavender, felt like a costume she had been forced to wear for a play in which she had no lines. Around her, the great families of the county moved in elegant orbits, their laughter and conversation a language she had never been taught to speak. She was tolerated here, barely. Her family's name had been stained 3 winters ago when her father, a scholar of modest reputation, had been accused of mishandling funds entrusted to him by the Marquis of Halstead. The accusation had never been proven, but in the brutal arithmetic of aristocratic society, unproven guilt was still guilt. Her father had died of a fever the following spring, and Alara and her mother had been left to live on the charity of a widowed aunt who viewed them as permanent reminders of poor judgment. No one had been cruel, exactly. It was worse than cruelty. It was the way conversations quieted when she entered a room, the way invitations arrived late, if they arrived at all, the way women's eyes slid past her as if she were a piece of furniture that had been left in the wrong place. Alara had learned to make herself small, to smile when silence greeted her, to pretend she did not notice the empty chairs beside her at dinner. She had almost succeeded in convincing herself it did not hurt. "Miss Calder." The voice came from her right, smooth as poured honey, and Alara turned to find Lady Cecily Ashworth approaching. Cecily was everything Alara was not, radiant, confidently wealthy, draped in pale blue satin that made her look like a winter moon. 2 other young women flanked her like attendant stars. "I wondered if I might speak with you," Cecily said, her smile perfectly pleasant. "Privately." Alara's heart gave a small, wary thump. She and Cecily had never exchanged more than courtesies. "Of course, Lady Ashworth." Cecily led her toward the terrace doors, and Alara followed, aware of the eyes that tracked their progress. Outside, the February air was sharp, biting through her thin silk. The terrace was empty, lit only by the spill of candlelight from the ballroom windows. Cecily turned to face her, and for a moment the pleasant smile remained. Then it faded, replaced by something colder. "I am going to be direct," Cecily said. "I hope you will forgive me." Alara's hands folded together in front of her. "Please. I understand that you and Lord Westbrook danced twice at Lady Marlowe's gathering last month." The name landed in Alara's chest like a stone. Lord Westbrook, Thomas. He had been one of the few men in the county who had not treated her as though she carried an illness. He had spoken to her about books, about travel, about the paintings in the Marlowe's gallery. For one glorious evening, she had felt like a person again. "Yes," she said carefully, "we danced twice." "I see." Cecily's voice was still soft, still composed. "Then perhaps you are not aware that Lord Westbrook and I have an understanding. Our families have been discussing a marriage for more than a year." Alara's stomach dropped. "I was not aware. He never mentioned." "No, I imagine he did not. Men can be careless with the truth when they are enjoying a new conversation." Cecily stepped closer, her eyes glinting in the dim light. "I am not here to demand that you stop speaking to him. I am here to ask you to consider what you might be doing to his reputation." Alara's breath caught. "His reputation." "You must know how it looks. A young lady of your circumstances, your family's situation, pursuing the attention of a man like Lord Westbrook. People talk, Miss Calder. They wonder if you are seeking a rescue, and they wonder if he is foolish enough to provide one." Each word was a needle, sliding in so smoothly that Alara almost did not feel the wound until it was too deep. Pursuing, seeking a rescue. The implication was clear. She was a fortune hunter, a desperate woman trapping a man too kind to see the net. "I have never sought anything from Lord Westbrook," Alara said, her voice steadier than she expected. "If I had known of your understanding, I would have kept my distance." Cecily studied her for a long moment. I am glad to hear it, but it may already be too late. The whispers have begun, and whispers, as you know, can become verdicts. She turned and walked back toward the ballroom, leaving Alara alone in the cold. The door opened, spilling light and music and the scent of beeswax candles into the night, then closed again, sealing her out. Alara stood motionless. The cold seeped through her slippers, through her skin, into the hollow space behind her ribs. For one evening, she had believed a kind man might see her as worth knowing, and now even that small hope was being taken from her, folded into an accusation she had not known existed. She should go back inside. She should hold her head up and return to her aunt and pretend nothing had happened. That was what she always did. But her legs would not move. The terrace door opened again. She did not turn. She could not bear to see Cecily's face again or to face the curious eyes of the ballroom. "Miss Calder." The voice was different, deep, unhurried, with the kind of quiet authority that did not need to raise itself to be heard. Alara turned. The Duke of Blackwood stood in the doorway. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark formal where that seemed to absorb the light around him. His face was angular, composed, and his eyes, gray as winter water, rested on her with an unreadable expression. He was not smiling. He rarely did. Alara's mouth went dry. The Duke of Blackwood was the most powerful man in the county, perhaps in the entire region. He was known for his discipline, his cold reserve, his refusal to participate in the gossip that sustained so many of his peers. He had spoken to her exactly once in the 4 years she had been attending such events, and that had been a remark about the weather so brief it had felt like a dismissal. She curtsied, feeling the tremor in her knees. "Your Grace." He did not respond immediately. He stepped fully onto the terrace, letting the door close behind him, and she realized with a jolt that they were now alone in the cold, surrounded by the dark shapes of sleeping rose bushes and the distant murmur of the party. "You are cold," he said. It was not a question. Alara's teeth were nearly chattering. A little. He removed his coat, a heavy garment of dark wool lined with silk, and held it out to her. She stared at it, then at him. "Your Grace, I could not possibly take your coat." "You can, and you will." He said it without heat, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. When she still did not move, he stepped closer and draped the coat over her shoulders. The warmth was immediate, shocking, carrying with it the scent of leather and cedar, and something faintly like rain on stone. Alara's fingers came up automatically to hold the edges closed. "Thank you," she whispered. He inclined his head. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The music from the ballroom drifted through the glass doors, a waltz she could not hear clearly enough to recognize. "I heard what Lady Ashworth said," the Duke said at last. Alara's blood chilled. "You heard." "I was standing on the far end of the terrace. She did not see me." He paused. "I did not intend to eavesdrop." Alara's face burned. She wanted to sink into the ground, to dissolve into the frost and disappear. He had heard everything. He had heard her accused of pursuing a man who had an understanding. He had heard her humiliation laid out in Cecily's smooth, terrible voice. "Then you know what she thinks of me," Alara managed. "I am a woman seeking a rescue." "No," the Duke's voice was quiet, but it cut through the cold. "That is what she said. It is not what I think." Alara looked up at him, startled. His face was still unreadable, but something in his eyes had shifted, a flicker of something she could not name. "What do you think?" she asked, before she could stop herself. He did not answer immediately. He looked at her as if he were seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time. The weight of that gaze was almost unbearable, but she did not look away. "I think," he said slowly, "that a woman who is cold and still chooses to stand outside rather than face a room that has been cruel to her is not seeking rescue. She is seeking air." Alara's throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever seen her clearly enough to offer such a quiet, devastating kindness. "I should go inside," she said, but she did not move. "Yes," he said, "but not yet. Stay a moment longer. The air is cold, but it is honest." She stayed. They stood together on the terrace, not speaking, while the moon rose higher over the sleeping gardens and the music played on inside. And for the first time in 4 years, Alara felt as though she might not be entirely alone. The carriage ride home was silent. Alara's aunt had retired to the corner of the seat, her chin dipping toward her chest with the rhythm of the wheels. Her mother sat across from her, eyes closed, her hands folded over her lap. The coat the Duke had given her was still wrapped around Alara's shoulders, and she had told no one, not even her mother, where it had come from. She had tried to return it before leaving Thornbury Hall. She had searched the ballroom for the Duke's tall, dark figure, but he had already gone. A footman had informed her with impeccable courtesy that his grace had departed. She had stood in the marble entrance hall, the coat folded over her arm, uncertain what to do. In the end, she had put it back on. The night was too cold and the coat was too warm, and some small, selfish part of her wanted to keep it for just a little longer. Now, as the carriage jolted along the rutted road, she pressed her cheek to the window and watched the darkness slide past. The events of the evening replayed themselves in her mind. Cecily's cold accusation, the Duke's unexpected kindness, the way his coat had settled over her shoulders like a shield. She did not know what to make of him. Alexander Blackwood. The name itself carried weight. He was said to be one of the wealthiest men in the North, with estates that stretched across 3 counties and a reputation for fairness that was rare among men of his station. But he was also known for his remoteness. He rarely attended social gatherings, and when he did, he stood apart, watching rather than participating. The mothers of marriageable daughters had long since stopped setting their sights on him. He had never shown interest in any of them. And yet he had stood on a cold terrace and given her his coat. Alara closed her eyes. She was being foolish. A single kind gesture did not mean anything. A man like the Duke of Blackwood had no reason to think of her beyond a passing moment of pity. By morning, he would have forgotten she existed. She would not allow herself to believe anything else. The days that followed were quiet. The household settled back into its familiar rhythm, sewing, reading, long walks in the garden when the weather permitted, and the constant, low hum of anxiety about money. Alara's aunt had been forced to dismiss 2 servants the previous autumn, and the household now ran on a skeleton staff. There had been talk of selling the London house, though nothing had come of it yet. 3 days after the ball, a letter arrived. Alara was in the morning room, mending a tear in her mother's shawl, when the housemaid brought it in on a small silver tray. The envelope was heavy, made of thick cream paper, and the seal was pressed with a crest she did not recognize. "For you, miss," the maid said, her eyes wide with curiosity. Alara took the letter, frowning. She broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside. "Miss Calder, I trust this finds you well. I am writing to ask if you would be so good as to return the coat you borrowed at Thornbury Hall. If it is convenient, I will send my carriage on Thursday afternoon. Yours, Alexander Blackwood." The note was brief, formal, and utterly ambiguous. Alara read it twice, her heartbeat quickening. He had not asked about her health. He had not mentioned the ball or their conversation. He had simply requested the return of his coat. And yet the fact that he had written at all was extraordinary. A duke did not write personal letters to young women of uncertain reputation. He sent a servant. He sent the coat's owner. He did not write. Unless he had wanted to write. Alara pressed the letter flat against her lap, trying to read the emotion behind the words. There was none. The Duke's handwriting was precise, controlled, giving nothing away. And yet, "Alara," her mother's voice came from the doorway. "What is that?" Alara looked up, slipping the letter beneath the shawl. "Nothing, Mama, an invitation." Her mother's face brightened slightly. "Another one. That is good. It means people are beginning to forget." Ilara forced a smile. Yes, perhaps they are. She did not tell her mother about the coat. She did not tell anyone. That evening, she sat in her small room beneath the eaves and wrote a careful reply, thanking His Grace for the use of the coat and confirming that Thursday afternoon would be convenient. She sealed the letter with her own modest wax, her hands trembling slightly. On Thursday, the Duke's carriage arrived exactly at 2 o'clock. It was not a modest carriage. It was sleek and dark, drawn by 4 matched grays with the Blackwood crest gleaming on the door. The driver was liveried, the footman wore gloves, and the entire vehicle seemed to radiate an almost oppressive elegance. Ilara stood at the window of the sitting room, the coat folded neatly over her arm, and watched it pull to a stop outside their modest house. Her aunt had looked out earlier and made a sound of confusion. "Whose carriage is that? It looks like the Blackwood livery." "It is," Ilara had said quietly. "His Grace lent me his coat. I am returning it." The silence that followed had been thick as fog. Her aunt had opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "He lent you his coat, the Duke of Blackwood?" "Yes." "Why?" Ilara had no answer. She still had no answer. She walked to the front door, stepped out into the February cold, and approached the carriage. The footman opened the door. The Duke was inside. Ilara's breath caught. She had expected to hand the coat to the driver. She had not expected to see him. He sat in the far corner of the carriage, dressed in dark gray, his face as unreadable as ever. He looked at her, and she felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. "Your Grace," she curtsied, aware of how absurd she must look, standing on the street with a folded coat in her arms. "I did not expect you to come yourself. I wanted to ensure the coat was returned safely." He paused. "Will you sit with me for a moment? The cold is not kind." She hesitated. Every rule of propriety dictated that she refuse. A young woman of her position did not sit alone in a carriage with a duke. But the memory of that cold terrace was still fresh, and the look in his eyes was not demanding. It was almost uncertain. She climbed into the carriage. The door closed behind her. The carriage did not move. The driver remained outside, waiting. Ilara sat across from the Duke, the coat still folded in her lap, and tried to remember how to breathe. "You did not have to write," she said. "You could have sent a servant." "I know." He paused again, his eyes resting on her face. "I wanted to see you." The words were simple, but they struck her like a blow. She looked down at the coat, feeling the heat climb into her cheeks. "I do not understand." "Nor do I," he said it so quietly she almost did not hear. Then he leaned forward slightly. "I have thought about our conversation on the terrace. I have thought about it more than I should." Ilara's heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Your Grace, I am not the kind of woman you should be seen with. Lady Ashworth made that clear." "Lady Ashworth is not my conscience." There was a sharpness in his voice now, a hint of something darker. "And she does not decide what I value." The words hung in the air between them, charged and terrifying. Ilara did not know what to say. She had spent 4 years learning to expect nothing, to hope for nothing. And now this man, this impossibly distant Duke, was looking at her as if she were something worth seeing. "I value honesty," he said, "and you were honest with me. That is a rare thing." "You barely know me." "Then let me know you." He said it without a trace of flirtation, as if he were asking for something far more serious. "Let me call on you, properly." Ilara's thoughts scattered. "Call on me. Your Grace, my family, our situation, the gossip would be relentless." "Let them talk." His voice was steady. "I have spent my life listening to people talk. I have never once let it change my course." She looked at him, at the unyielding lines of his face, and saw something flicker in those gray eyes, a vulnerability she had not expected. He was not indifferent. He was waiting. And for a man like him, waiting was not a natural state. "I do not know if I can survive another scandal," she whispered. "You do not know what it has been like." Then tell me. The carriage was warm, the air thick with the scent of leather and his presence. Outside, the February wind rattled the windows, but inside there was only this, his voice, his eyes. The impossible question hanging in the air. Alara took a breath, and then slowly she began to speak. She told him everything. She had not intended to. The words had simply begun to flow, as if some dam inside her had cracked and would not be sealed again. She told him about her father, about the accusation, about the long winter after his death when she and her mother had lived on broth and borrowed bread. She told him about the parties where she had stood at the edges, invisible, and the slow, grinding erosion of hope. The Duke listened. He did not interrupt. He did not offer empty consolations. He simply sat across from her, his eyes steady, and let her speak. When she finished, the carriage was silent. Alara pressed the heel of her palm against her chest, trying to ease the ache that had opened there. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not mean to burden you." "You did not burden me." His voice was rough. "You trusted me. That is not a burden." She looked up at him, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. There was something in his face she had never seen before, an intensity, a heat barely contained. He looked as if he wanted to reach across the space between them and touch her, but he held himself still. "May I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Why did you come to the terrace that night? You said you were standing on the far end. You must have heard us. You could have left." He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I came because I saw you leave. You looked as if you were trying not to cry, and I followed because I could not stop myself." Alara's breath caught. "You followed me?" "Yes." "Why?" He looked away then, toward the window, and for the first time since she had met him, he seemed uncertain. "I have asked myself that question every day since. I do not have an answer that satisfies me. I only know that when I saw Lady Ashworth lead you outside, something in me refused to look away." The vulnerability in his voice was almost too much to bear. Alara clutched the folded coat tighter. "I do not know what to say." "Then say nothing." He turned back to her. "Let me call on you. Let me see you again." "Your Grace." "My name is Alexander." The words hung in the air. She knew she should not say it. The intimacy was too much too soon. But the look in his eyes was not demanding. It was asking. "Alexander," she whispered. Something changed in his face then. The remoteness fell away entirely, and for just a moment she saw the man beneath the title, a man who was lonely, though he would never admit it, a man who had spent years building walls, only to find himself standing outside them in the cold. "I will call on you tomorrow," he said. It was not a question. "My aunt will be shocked." "Let her be shocked." He reached out then, and his hand covered hers just for a moment. His touch was warm, firm, and it sent a current through her body that she could not name. "I am not afraid of shock. I am only afraid of not seeing you again." The carriage door opened. The footman stood waiting. Alara stepped out into the cold, the coat still in her arms, and watched the carriage pull away. The February wind bit at her skin, but she did not feel it. She had just given a duke her story, and he had asked for more. The next afternoon, he came to call. The house was in chaos. Alara's aunt had not believed her when she said the duke was coming. She had paced the sitting room, wringing her hands, her face pale with anxiety. "The Duke of Blackwood, here, in this house. Alara, what have you done?" "Nothing, aunt." Alara smoothed her best dress, a dark green wool with a high collar. "He asked to call," I agreed. "Why would the Duke of Blackwood want to call on you?" The question stung, though Alara knew her aunt did not mean it cruelly. It was simply the truth of their world. A duke did not call on girls like her. She had no dowry, no connections, no name worth mentioning. She had nothing. But she had his coat. She had returned it, and he had come anyway. The carriage arrived at 3 o'clock. Alara watched from the window as the duke stepped down, dressed in a dark blue coat and white cravat, looking impossibly out of place on their modest street. A neighbor across the road had stopped to stare. Two children had gathered on the corner. The news would be all over the district by nightfall. "Sit down, Aunt," Alara said. "Please, you will make yourself ill." Her aunt sat down, but her eyes remained fixed on the door. The Duke was announced. He entered the sitting room as if he had walked into a palace, his bearing unchanged by the worn furniture and the fading wallpaper. He bowed to Alara's aunt, who looked as if she might faint. "Mrs. Hathaway," he said, "thank you for receiving me." "Your Grace," her aunt's voice was faint, "the honor is entirely ours." He turned to Alara, and the formality in his face softened almost imperceptibly. "Miss Calder." "Your Grace," she curtsied. The call proceeded with agonizing formality. Tea was served. The aunt asked questions about the weather, about the roads, about the Duke's estates. He answered each one with patient courtesy, but Alara could feel his attention on her like a hand at her back, steadying her. When her aunt excused herself to check on the tea, the Duke leaned forward slightly. "Your aunt is terrified of me. She has never had a Duke in her sitting room. And you, are you terrified of me?" Alara met his eyes. "No, I am not." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. It was the first time she had seen him smile, and the effect was devastating. "Good." That evening, after he had gone, Alara sat alone in her room and replayed every moment of the call. The way he had looked at her over the rim of his teacup. The way his voice had softened when he said her name. The way he had paused at the door, his hand resting on the frame, and said, "Tomorrow, I will come again." He did come again, and again. Within a week, the entire county was talking. Alara knew it would happen. She had known it from the first moment she stepped into his carriage. But the reality was harsher than she had imagined. Wherever she went, eyes followed her. At church, the whispers were a constant hum. At the market, women she had known for years turned their faces away. The implication was clear. She had somehow ensnared the Duke, and they were all waiting for the trap to spring. "You must be careful," her mother said one night, her voice strained. "The Duke may think he wants this, but a man of his station, he will listen to the gossip eventually. They all do." Alara said nothing. She had told herself the same thing 100 times. But Alexander kept coming. He did not seem to care about the whispers. When they walked together in the garden, his hand sometimes brushed hers, and he did not pull away. When she spoke, he listened with a focus that made her feel seen in a way she had not felt in years. He asked about her father's work, about the books she had read, about the dreams she had once had before the world had taken them from her. She began to believe that perhaps this was real, perhaps he truly saw her. Then came the night of the Ashworth ball. The invitation arrived on a silver tray, addressed not to her aunt but to Alara herself. "The Marquis and Marchioness of Ashworth request the pleasure of Miss Alara Calder's company at a ball in honor of the engagement of Lady Cecily Ashworth and Lord Thomas Westbrook." Alara read the words twice, her heart sinking. So it was done. Cecily and Lord Westbrook were to be married. The man who had danced with her twice, who had spoken to her about books and paintings, was now bound to the woman who had called her a fortune hunter. She should not care. She had not thought of Thomas Westbrook since the night of the Thornbury ball, but the invitation felt like a message, a reminder of her place. She was being invited to witness the union that had been used to shame her. "Will you go?" her mother asked. Alara looked up. "Alexander will be there. He has received an invitation as well." "That is not an answer." Alara folded the invitation carefully. "I do not know what the answer is." In the end, she decided to go. She would not hide. She had spent 4 years hiding, and she would not do it anymore. She wore her best dress, the green silk she had worn to the last gathering, altered once more to fit properly, and arranged her hair with careful hands. She did not look like a woman who belonged among aristocrats, but she would go anyway. Alexander arrived to escort her. He was dressed in black formal wear, and his face was grim. "You do not have to do this," he said. "Yes, I do." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then stay with me. I will not leave your side." They rode to the Ashworth estate in his carriage. Alara's hands were cold despite her gloves. The Ashworth estate was far grander than Thornbury Hall. Its gates flanked by stone lions, its drive lined with torches. The ballroom was lit by crystal chandeliers, the music of an orchestra spilling out into the night. When they entered, the room fell silent. For one terrible moment, Alara thought she would flee. Every eye in the room was on her, on them, and she could feel the weight of 100 unspoken questions. What is she doing here? How did she catch him? What does he see in her? Alexander's hand found hers. He did not care who saw. He led her into the room, his head high, and the silence broke into a storm of whispers. They had taken only a few steps when Cecily appeared. She was dressed in pale pink, her hair arranged with pearls, her smile as polished as ever. Lord Westbrook stood behind her, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Your Grace," Cecily said, her voice carrying. "Miss Calder, how delightful that you could both come." "Lady Ashworth," Alexander's voice was cool, "allow me to offer my congratulations on your engagement." "Thank you." Cecily's eyes moved to Alara, and something sharp glinted in them. "Miss Calder, I am so glad you are here. There is something I have been meaning to say to you for some time." Alara tensed. "Oh. I owe you an apology." The words were soft, perfectly practiced. "The last time we spoke I was unkind. I hope you can forgive me." The room seemed to hold its breath. Alara stared at Cecily, trying to find the trap, but Cecily's face was serene, her smile glowing. "Thank you," Alara said carefully. "I bear you no ill will." Cecily's smile widened. "You are too gracious, and I am so pleased to see you here with the Duke. It seems you have found your rescue after all." The word struck like a slap. Rescue. The same word Cecily had used before. The room seemed to ripple with quiet amusement. Alara felt the heat rise to her face, but before she could speak, Alexander stepped forward. "I would advise you, Lady Ashworth," he said, his voice quiet but dangerous, "to choose your words with greater care." Cecily's smile faltered. "Your Grace, I only meant." "I know what you meant." Alexander's eyes were cold as winter stone. "And I will not tolerate it. Is that understood?" For a long, terrible moment no one spoke. Then Cecily dipped her head. "Of course, Your Grace, I meant no offense." Alexander did not respond. He turned to Alara, his hand still holding hers, and led her toward the refreshment table. The crowd parted for them, the whispers growing louder. "You did not have to do that," Alara said, her voice shaking. "Yes, I did." He released her hand and turned to face her. "I will not let anyone speak to you that way, not while I am standing beside you." But now they will talk even more. They will say you are defending a woman who does not belong here. "Let them talk." He said it as he had before, with the same quiet certainty. "They will talk whether I defend you or not. At least this way they will know where I stand." Alara looked at him, at the hard set of his jaw and the fire in his gray eyes, and felt something shift inside her chest. He was not protecting her because he pitied her. He was protecting her because he could not bear to see her hurt. "Thank you," she whispered. He reached out and touched her cheek just for a moment, his thumb brushing the edge of her jaw. "Do not thank me. Just stay with me." They danced together twice, and each time the room watched. Alara felt their eyes like needles, but she forced herself to keep her head up. She focused on Alexander's hand at her waist, the steady rhythm of his steps, the way he looked at her as if she were the only woman in the room. As the evening drew to a close, she excused herself to the retiring room. The hallway was empty, the music muffled by the heavy doors. She was adjusting her hair in the mirror when the door opened and Cecily walked in. "Miss Calder," she said, "I was hopping to speak with you alone." Alara turned. "What do you want?" Cecily's face was no longer smiling. "I want to warn you." "Warn me." "You think the Duke will marry you." Cecily stepped closer, her voice low. "But he cannot. His family has expectations. His position demands certain things. And no matter how many dances he gives you, he will eventually choose duty over whatever this is." Alara's heart tightened. "You do not know him." "I know men like him." Cecily's eyes were cold. "I know what happens to women like you when the men they love remember who they are." She turned and walked out, leaving Alara alone with her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked pale, uncertain, the green silk too fine for her station. Alara stared at herself for a long time. When she returned to the ballroom, Alexander was waiting for her. His face lightened when he saw her. "I was worried," he said. "I am fine." She forced a smile. "The evening is almost over." They left shortly after. The carriage ride home was quiet, the silence heavy with unspoken things. When they reached her aunt's house, Alexander helped her down and walked her to the door. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "I know it could not have been easy." "It was not difficult." He paused, his hand still holding hers. "Not when I was with you." She looked up at him, searching his face for some sign of doubt. There was none, only the same steady certainty. But as she closed the door behind her and climbed the stairs to her room, Cecily's words returned. "He will eventually choose duty over whatever this is." She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and wondered if the warning had been cruelty or truth. 3 weeks passed, and the Duke of Blackwood continued to call. He came every afternoon, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 3. He brought books and discussed them with her in the sitting room while her aunt hovered nearby, alternately beaming and wringing her hands. He walked with Alara in the garden, their arms brushing, their conversations growing longer and more intimate. One afternoon, as they sat beneath the bare branches of the old oak tree, he asked her a question she had not expected. "What do you want from your life, Alara?" She looked at him, surprised. "I do not know how to answer that." "Then think about it. I am patient." She did think about it. She thought about it for a long time while the cold wind stirred the dry grass and the sky turned gray. "I want to be taken seriously," she said at last. "I want to be seen as more than the daughter of a disgraced man. I want to matter." "You matter to me." "That is not the same." He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "No, it is not, but it is a beginning." She turned to look at him. "And what do you want, Alexander?" He did not answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, his face unreadable. "I want to be free of the weight of my name," he said quietly. "I want to make a choice that is not dictated by duty, just once." The words settled over her like a cold wind. She understood now what he was saying. A man like him did not make choices freely. Every decision was weighed against centuries of expectation, against the needs of his estates, his family, his legacy. "And if you made that choice," she asked, "what would it be?" He turned to her then, and his eyes were dark, intense. "I think you already know." Her breath caught. She did know. She had known for weeks, perhaps from the very beginning, but hearing it was different. Hearing it made it real. "Alexander," she whispered, "there is something I have not told you." His brow furrowed. "What is it?" "Before my father died, he gave me a letter." She paused, gathering her courage. "He told me to keep it hidden until the time was right. He said it would change everything." Alexander's face stilled. "What is in the letter?" "I do not know. I have never opened it." She swallowed. "I was afraid of what it might say, but now I think I need to know." He reached out and took her hand. "Then open it. Whatever it contains, we will face it together." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Tomorrow. I will open it tomorrow." The next morning, Alara sat at her writing desk and stared at the letter. It had been hidden for 3 years, tucked inside a hollowed-out book that had once belonged to her father. The paper was yellowed, the seal cracked. Her mother did not know it existed. She had never told anyone until Alexander. She broke the seal. The letter was written in her father's hand, small and precise. She read it slowly, her heart pounding, her hands trembling. When she finished, she read it again, and then again. Then she began to cry. Alexander arrived at 3 o'clock. He found her in the sitting room, pale and shaken, the letter clutched in her hands. Her aunt was not there. Ilara had asked her to leave them alone. "What is it?" he asked, crossing to her. "Ilara, what has happened?" She looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed. "My father was innocent." "I know." "No," she held out the letter. "He was innocent, and there is proof. The letter is from the Marquis of Halstead himself. He confesses that the accusation was false. He admits that he fabricated the charges to cover his own misappropriation of funds." Alexander took the letter and read it. When he finished, his face had gone very still. "This letter," he said slowly, "could restore your father's name. It could change everything for you." "Yes," Ilara's voice was barely a whisper. "But my father never used it. He kept it hidden. He must have known that exposing the Marquis would ruin his own family. He had taken bribes, he had lied, but he was still powerful. And my father was already dying. He chose to protect us from further scandal rather than clear his own name." Alexander knelt in front of her, the letter still in his hand. "Your father was a brave man." "He was a fool," Ilara's voice cracked. "He let the world believe he was a thief. He let his wife and daughter live in shame. And now I have the power to clear his name, but I do not know if I should." "Why would you not?" She looked at him, at his steady gray eyes, and felt the weight of everything she had not yet said. "Because if I use this letter, the Marquis will deny it. He will say it is a forgery. He will use all his power to destroy me, and anyone standing beside me." She paused. "He would destroy you, Alexander. A scandal involving the Duke of Blackwood and the daughter of a disgraced scholar. It would follow you for the rest of your life." His jaw tightened. "You think I care about that?" "You should." She pulled her hand away. "Cecily said you would eventually choose duty. Perhaps she was right, but I will not be the reason you lose everything." Alexander stood, his face dark. "You think I am choosing you out of pity. You think my feelings are so weak that a letter could undo them. I think you do not know what it is to be ruined." Ilara rose to her feet. "I do. I have lived it, and I will not drag you into it." She took the letter from his hand and walked out of the room, leaving him standing alone in the fading afternoon light. She did not see him for 3 days. At first she told herself it was for the best. She had done the right thing. She had protected him from the consequences of her family's shame. But as the hours stretched into days, the silence became unbearable. She missed him. She missed the sound of his voice, the way he looked at her, the warmth of his hand on hers. She missed the feeling of being seen. On the third night, she sat by the window of her room, staring out at the rain, and let herself cry. Her aunt found her there. "Ilara, what is wrong?" "Nothing." Ilara wiped her eyes. "I am just tired." Her aunt sat down beside her, her weathered hands folded in her lap. "You do not have to pretend with me. I know the Duke has stopped calling." Ilara said nothing. "What happened?" "I told him to stay away." Ilara's voice was hollow. "I told him I would not drag him into my family's shame." Her aunt was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "You are more like your father than you know." Ilara looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "He also thought he was protecting us by hiding the truth. He was wrong." The words hit Ilara like a physical blow. She stared at her aunt, her mind racing. "You know about the letter." "I knew your father had kept something. He never told me what, but I knew." Her aunt's eyes were kind, sad. "He thought silence would protect us. All it did was leave us in the dark." Ilara sat motionless, the rain tapping against the glass. Her father had hidden the letter to protect them, but the silence had not protected them. It had only deepened their shame, left them isolated and uncertain, cut them off from anyone who might have stood beside them. She had done the same thing. She had pushed Alexander away to protect him, but all she had done was leave herself alone in the dark. "I have to go to him," she said. Her aunt nodded. "Then go." The Duke's estate was 2 hours away by carriage, and by the time Alara arrived, the rain had turned to sleet. The gates of Blackwood Manor loomed before her, dark and imposing. She had no invitation. She had no right to be here, but she would not turn back. The butler who answered the door looked at her with carefully concealed surprise. "Miss Calder, His Grace did not mention you were expected." "He is not expecting me, but I must see him." "His Grace is in his study. He has asked not to be disturbed." "Please," Alara's voice shook, "tell him I am here. If he sends me away, I will go." The butler hesitated, then bowed. "Wait here." She stood in the marble entrance hall, her cloak dripping onto the floor. The house was silent, the only sound the distant tick of a clock. Minutes passed, then footsteps. Alexander appeared at the top of the staircase. He was dressed in a dark coat, his cravat loosened, his face shadowed. He looked as if he had not slept in days. "Ilara." She felt the tears rise again, but she forced them back. "I was wrong. I thought pushing you away would protect you, but I was wrong." He descended the stairs slowly, his eyes fixed on her. "Why did you come?" "Because I cannot bear the silence." Her voice broke. "Because I would rather face the scandal with you than face a life without you. Because I love you." The words fell into the marble hall like stones into still water. Alexander stopped 2 steps above her, his face unreadable. "You love me," he repeated. "Yes." She looked up at him, her chin trembling. "I have been afraid to say it. I have been afraid of what it might cost, but I cannot pretend any more." For a long, terrible moment, he said nothing. Then he moved, crossing the space between them in 2 steps, and his arms came around her, pulling her against his chest. She felt his hand against the back of her head, his breath warm against her hair. "I have been going mad," he said, his voice rough. "I could not eat, I could not sleep. I kept thinking of you, alone in that house, believing you were doing me a kindness by sending me away." He pulled back, his hands cupping her face. "I do not want your protection. I want you." She sobbed, and he kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tears that slid down her skin. "I love you," he said. "I have loved you since the night I saw you standing on that terrace, freezing rather than facing a room that did not deserve you." "Alexander." "Marry me, Alara." The words were not a request. They were a declaration. "I do not care what the world says. I do not care about the Marquis or the gossip or any of it. Marry me." She looked at him through her tears and saw the truth in his eyes. He was not afraid. He was not uncertain. He was the most certain thing in her world. "Yes," she whispered, "yes." He kissed her then, lightly, reverently, as if she were something precious. And in the cold marble hall of Blackwood Manor, with the rain falling outside and the future uncertain, she felt something she had not felt in years. She felt hope. The engagement was announced quietly, without fanfare, but within days the news had spread across 3 counties. The Duke of Blackwood was to marry Miss Alara Calder, the daughter of a disgraced scholar, a woman with no fortune and no connections. The gossip was relentless. Alara heard the whispers wherever she went, in the village, at church, in the letters that arrived from distant relatives expressing cautious congratulations that sounded more like warnings. She bore it all with a composure that surprised her. Alexander stood beside her at every public gathering, his hand on her arm, his gaze daring anyone to speak against her. He did not flinch. He did not waver. But Alara knew that the worst was yet to come. The Marquis of Halstead had not yet responded to the engagement. He had been silent, which was more frightening than any open opposition. Alara knew he had learned of the letter. She had sent him a copy, along with a brief note explaining her intentions. She had not yet made the letter public, but the threat was there. She wanted to wait until after the wedding. She wanted to become Alexander's wife before she launched a battle that might consume them both. But the Marquis had other plans. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by a liveried servant. It was brief and cold. "Miss Calder, I have received your communication. I deny the allegations contained therein. The document you possess is a forgery, and if you attempt to make it public, I will respond with every legal means at my disposal. I have engaged counsel. I advise you to consider carefully before proceeding." Halstead. Alara read it twice, then handed it to Alexander. They were sitting in the library at Blackwood Manor, the fire crackling in the grate. He read it in silence, then set it aside. "He is frightened," he said. "He should be. The letter is real." "I know." Alexander rose and began to pace. "But he is also powerful. If he denies it, the courts will side with him. The letter alone may not be enough." Alara watched him, her heart sinking. "Then what do we do?" He stopped and turned to her. "We find more evidence. The Marquis has been playing this game for a long time. There must be others he has wronged, others who would speak if given the chance. And if there are not, then we will make the letter public and trust the truth to prevail." He crossed to her, taking her hands. "But first, I want you to know, this changes nothing between us. I will marry you whether or not your father's name is cleared." She looked up at him. "It changes everything. I cannot marry you as the daughter of a thief. I need to stand beside you as an equal." He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Then we will clear his name together." The search for evidence consumed the next 2 weeks. Alexander wrote to his legal contacts in London. Alara reached out to her father's old colleagues, the few who had remained loyal. Most responded with polite refusals. One or two expressed sympathy but offered nothing. Then, on a gray afternoon in late March, a letter arrived from a name Alara did not recognize. "Miss Calder, I served as clerk to the Marquis of Halstead for 12 years. I know the truth of what happened to your father. I have documents. I will meet you, but only in person and only where no one will see. Yours, J. Whitmore." Alara showed the letter to Alexander. His face was grim. "It could be a trap. Or it could be the proof we need." The meeting was arranged for 2 days later at a tavern on the outskirts of the county. Alara insisted on going. Alexander refused to let her go alone. They arrived at dusk. The tavern was small and dark, the air thick with the smell of ale and wood smoke. A man was waiting in the back corner, gray-haired, stooped, his face lined with years of service. "Miss Calder," he said, rising, "you came." "Mr. Whitmore." Alara sat across from him, Alexander standing behind her. "Thank you for writing." The man's eyes flicked to Alexander, then back to Alara. "I served the Marquis faithfully for over a decade. I saw things I should have spoken about long ago, but I was afraid." He paused. "When I heard about your engagement, I realized I could not stay silent any longer." He reached into his coat and produced a bundle of papers, tied with twine. "These are copies of the original ledgers. They show the misappropriation clearly. They also show that the Marquis arranged for your father to be blamed." Alara's hands trembled as she took the papers. "Why now? Why not years ago?" "Because I am dying." The man's voice was steady. "And I want to meet my maker with a clean conscience." She looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you. I do not know what this will cost you, but thank you." He shook his head. "It has already cost me too much. Just use it well." That night, Alara and Alexander sat together in the library and read through the ledgers until the candles burned low. The evidence was overwhelming. Not only had the Marquis framed her father, but he had done the same to at least 3 other men over the years, men who had been ruined, silenced, destroyed. Alara looked up from the papers, her eyes bright with tears. "We can do this. We can clear his name." Alexander took her hand. "We can, but it will be a war. Are you prepared?" She met his gaze. I have been waiting for this war my whole life. The truth broke like a storm. Ilara and Alexander did not go to the courts. They went to the press. Within a week, the story was in every London newspaper. The Marquis of Halstead had framed an innocent man, and the evidence was undeniable. The ledgers were reproduced. The testimony was published. The public, always hungry for the fall of the powerful, devoured it. The Marquis protested. He denied. He threatened. But the evidence was too strong. Within a month he had retreated to his country estate disgraced. His political allies abandoned him. His name became a byword for corruption. And Ilara Calder became a symbol of justice. The wedding took place in the spring at the small village church where Ilara had prayed alone for years. It was not a grand affair by aristocratic standards, but the church was full. Faces she had not seen in years had returned, eager to claim friendship they had never offered. Ilara received them all with quiet grace, but she did not forget. She walked down the aisle on the arm of her aunt, her mother watching from the front pew with tears streaming down her face. She wore a gown of pale ivory silk, simple and elegant, and in her hand she carried a small bouquet of white roses. Alexander stood at the altar, waiting. When he saw her, his face softened. It was the same look he had given her on the terrace that first night, the look of a man who could not look away. The ceremony was brief. The vows were spoken, and when the vicar pronounced them man and wife, the church erupted in applause. They did not linger at the reception. They slipped away as soon as decorum allowed, climbing into the carriage that would take them to Blackwood Manor. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "You have done it," Alexander said, his hand holding hers. "You have restored your father's name." "We have done it," Ilara said. "I could not have done it without you." He shook his head. "You would have found a way. You are the strongest person I have ever known." She looked out the window at the passing countryside, at the green fields and the bare trees and the wide, open sky. She thought of the girl she had been 4 years ago, cold, ashamed, invisible, and she thought of the woman she had become. "I used to believe that love was a rescue," she said quietly, "that I needed someone to save me." Alexander's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "And now I know that love is not a rescue, it is a choice to stand beside someone, not behind them." She turned to him, her eyes bright. "You have never tried to save me. You have only tried to see me. That is the greatest gift I have ever received." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. "Then I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you." The carriage rolled on through the twilight, toward the great house that would now be her home. Ilara leaned her head against Alexander's shoulder and closed her eyes. She was not afraid anymore. She was not invisible. She was exactly where she belonged. That night she stood on the terrace of Blackwood Manor, wrapped in a shawl, looking out at the gardens that would soon bloom with spring. Alexander came up behind her, his arms sliding around her waist. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice soft against her hair. She turned in his arms and looked up at him. This man who had seen her when the world had refused to, who had chosen her when it would have been easier to look away. "Yes," she said, "I am happy." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and in the quiet of the night, surrounded by the scent of new growth and the distant song of a nightingale, Ilara felt the last of her old wounds close. The girl who had once been called unworthy stood in the arms of a duke, loved and loving, ready to face whatever came next. And for the first time in her life, she knew, truly knew, that she was enough.